Hi everyone. I'm Justin Robbins, and you are turning into the Contact Center Show, a brand new series from the team at CX today. We're going to launch a number of conversations with contact center leaders exploring best practices on how they're leading and managing their organizations. As we jump into this very first conversation, I couldn't think of a better person to help me bring this new series to life than the senior editor of CX Today, Charlie Mitchell. Charlie's someone that I've gotten to know over a number of years, has been gracious enough to invite me to be part of this new adventure with them, and is someone who I know hears a ton of insight from contact center leaders every single day. So Charlie, I'm kind of excited to get to turn the tables and be the one moderating this conversation with you today. The question is, are you up for the challenge?
Absolutely. It's quite something to be on the other side of this interview process. But yeah, as you say, I've listened to everything contact center and customer experience every day. So I'm very excited about this new show that we're doing. So yeah, and I'm excited to talk through some best practices with you today.
Awesome. Now, I know you and I have put a bunch of topics together in terms of what are different things that we could talk about. And I actually want to get us started on this first episode with something that's very near and dear to me, and that's quality assurance. So I hope you're ready. But what I'd love to do in these next couple of minutes, Charlie, is walk through 10 tips that will help every contact center leader improve the impact of their quality assurance program. And if you're ready to go, I'm going to have you start with tip number 1.
Awesome. Yeah. And as you said, Justin, I've been thinking a fair bit about this, kind of just to narrow down kind of 5 tips for contact center quality assurance. I think my number one tip, and I think the best place to start, is the tip of creating a connected learning strategy. And I always think that the contact centers that draw the most value from QA kind of consider it as a team sport. So joint at the hip, kind of their coaches and their analysts will develop a shared set of performance standards, isolate and close performance gaps, and then kind of run post-training reinforcement. And I think only with this shared sort of philosophy can businesses really draw the most value out of their investment in QA, both in terms of people and process, but also their technology investments in new QA systems too. So that's my first tip.
Yeah, and it's a really good one, Charlie. It helps combat that us against them mentality. It also ensures that the connection between what's evaluated in quality programs kind of lives through, and whether that's coaching, whether it's ongoing performance development, or to your point, how we're even thinking about the tools and resources that we're using to manage our organization. So love that idea of making it being part of a connected learning strategy. So that's awesome. I'm going to kind of start to build on that. And my first tip is to make sure that you're using more than one method to evaluate the quality of your customer interactions. And the reason why I say that, Charlie, is I think when we talk about contact center quality, the first thing many of us who are and have been contact center leaders think of is the quality assurance form. And while that's good and it has a purpose, and I bet you and I are going to talk about some things specific to the form during our conversation today, I want us to also think about the value of other ways of looking at quality. And that might be things that are customer surveys. It could be in some organizations, I know, maybe using secret shopper services, or it's using kind of other metrics along the way. So don't just get fixated that your quality form is the only way you're measuring quality. There's actually a number of other methods that you can be using, so you've got a more well-rounded picture of what's happening in your customer interactions.
And I think that's a really good point, actually, because in one contact center that I went to, they extended QA into the IVR as well. And they almost felt as though kind of agents were like, wow, you're really kind of monitoring our conversations so closely, yet we know there's problems within the IVR that customers tell us every day. So yeah, I really love that tip in kind of broadening the kind of the confines of contact center QA.
Awesome. Charlie, what's your next tip for us?
Awesome. So I want to talk a little bit, of course, about the contact center QA scorecard and the importance of aligning quality scores with customer satisfaction and looking to find correlation between the two metrics. And I think this is important because if that correlation does indeed exist, it suggests that you're measuring what matters most to your customers. And if it doesn't, it maybe suggests that it's time to update your contact center QA scorecard. And I think it's a really good kind of measure whenever you make a change to the scorecard that you're still kind of doing what's best for your customers too. So that would be my next tip.
Yeah, Charlie, I like it. And I think in a lot of organizations that can work. I'll throw one word of caution out based off of a conversation I had with someone recently. So his contact center, they were a lender, and one of his teams had to call people and tell them that they were denied for the loan that they were hoping to get. Now, his organization was also in the midst of trying to do what you just talked about, tie internal quality assurance measures to customer survey results. And what they found is that these customers that had been told they weren't going to get a loan, surprisingly or not, weren't very high promoters. In this case, they were using a net promoter. And so, of course, you just told me I can't get the loan I was hoping to get. I'm not going to refer you to a friend or family member. So I think what you mentioned is really valuable, but I also want us always to have that kind of sober approach to it's not always going to be the right answer for your business. And so just keep in mind what's the role of quality and what's the role of your customer surveys and the things that you might be using to understand how they might think and feel about your organization.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Justin, as well, and to kind of make sure you're factoring in the intent, the customer intent as well into kind of that thought process, as you mentioned, yeah, is key.
Yeah. So building on this idea, we've talked about the form a little bit already, Charlie. I think my next tip is recognizing that your quality assurance form is not your quality program. I can't tell you how often I sit down with a contact center leader to talk about quality, and I ask them, hey, tell me a little bit about your quality program. And the first thing they do is say, well, here's our form. And your quality form is actually a tool. And often this tool should really only be one page. It should be kind of a reference for me if I'm evaluating someone. Like it's just something for me to do a little bit of work to look at something. But that's not my standards. That's not the document that explains how, to your point, it's part of a connected learning strategy. It's just a tool. And in fact, we don't even know how we should build and use that tool if we don't have a broader strategy. And so my tip with this, Charlie, really is making sure that you actually have a quality program strategy that encompasses things like your quality assurance form. It's looking at your criteria. It's looking at coaching and your connected learning strategy and the roles and responsibilities that you have as part of quality. But your form, that comes later. That's not your strategy.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I think that comes back very well to that whole connected strategy point that we raised earlier. Yeah, so I think again another really great point there, Justin.
Yeah. So Charlie, I know we're moving through these pretty fast. It's already
Yeah.
your third tip. I'm curious, what do you have in mind for us? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, so I do, although you kind of warned that the QA scorecard is only one part of the QA strategy, I do want to kind of focus it again on it again for my next best practice. And that is to demonstrate your unquantifiable standards within the QA scorecard. So I think you often see things within a QA scorecard kind of based on politeness, empathy, agent focus, maybe, which are very subjective. And agents often have kind of problems with that criteria. So I think the contact center should be kind of very focused on making that criteria tangible. So kind of creating a library of examples where an agent did a really good job of hitting that criteria, or kind of using certain role play based examples. I think that's a really valuable way in bringing scorecard criteria to life and helping agents to kind of better understand their performance expectations too.
I think this is such an important tip, Charlie. It's when I think about my time leading a quality program or even one of the boards that I sit on now, we always talk about having this library where you can go back and see what these standards are like when they're in practice, even being able to see how others have coached and developed people to build proficiency in these skills. I think as part of this, one of the best practices I often recommend is this idea of a kind of a standards repository and definitions document. So to your point, say I've got a criteria that talks about, hey, I demonstrated empathy. First, we need to be able to define, like, what do we mean by empathy? The way I always use this with my teams is, how will you know it when you see it? So we've got, any industry words or any acronyms, right? All of that is clearly written out and explained in plain language. It's like, okay, now I can understand it. I can see, hey, whatever our criteria is for rating it, if we're using a Likert scale or something else, like, what do all of those measurements mean? And then you add on to that what you've talked about in terms of me being able to see or hear it in action. Talk about a valuable tool, not just for new employees in your contact center, but for new quality analysts, for new supervisors who are doing coaching, right? This is setting them up for success. So I feel like I just fanboyed on your tip there, Charlie. But look, if I were walking away from today's video and there was just one thing that I would recommend, the tip you just mentioned, I think, is one of the most important. So thank you for bringing that up. I love that tip, Charlie.
Yeah, no, that's great. And as you mentioned there, I love the idea of creating that document, as you said, of specific terms, and that extends into like the acronyms that agents are typing into the CRM every day, and that as well. And I think in terms of really bolstering agent proficiency kind of early within the kind of sort of agent life cycle, I think it's a critical piece of advice.
Yeah, awesome. So let's actually break out from not just the scorecard, but I think the conversations that happen around quality so often. And one of the debates I've been a part of over the years is around whether or not we need scores in quality assurance.
Yeah.
If I think about the ways lots of contact centers report on the impact of quality in their contact center, you look at a report that has agent scores, and it's, hey, this is what they're scoring in their quality evaluations, or it's even, this is the number of assessments that our quality analysts did, right? Everything that we're looking at, we're trying to put a score and a number around. And I get why. It's the way we've always done it, and it makes it easy. But I would argue that it's not always the best way of doing it. In fact, if I think about my time as a quality analyst or as a coach or as a leader, what I often found is my conversations around quality with my agents was something like this. Hey, you got a 73 and our minimum standard is an 86. And so why'd you get the 73? What'd you miss? And how do we make sure that next time you get the 86 or the 93 or the 100, whatever it is? And from one interaction to the next, the reason they got the score wasn't necessarily always the same. And in fact, the conversation wasn't about sustainable performance improvement at all. It was about changing a number. And if there's anything that I know, numbers can be manipulated. They can be negotiated. And again, the contributing factors aren't consistent. And so one of the tips and one of the challenges I put out to people is to take more of a behavior-based approach to their quality program. And what I mean from that is a couple examples. So let's say the first example, Charlie, you're a brand new employee. I may decide that, hey, for brand new employees in my contact center, quality assurance actually is a multi-phased approach where we focus on different skills over a series of conversations and a series of weeks. And so week one, we just focus on really measuring and coaching and developing skill A. And that's all we listen for. That's all we observe. That's all we talk about. And once you're proficient on that skill, then we move to skill B and C and D, right? So that's one approach. Second could be, hey, Charlie's been here for a while, and I've observed that he pretty consistently struggles with this piece of our interactions. And while there may be a number of criteria, say I've got 15 criteria I evaluate on an interaction, maybe 12 of them you do really well, 2 you do somewhat, inconsistently, but 1 you miss all the time. Traditionally, a quality conversation is, hey, Charlie, let's talk about all the things. Here's all the things you did well. Here's this, here's that. Doesn't really focus your efforts. Versus if I said, hey, Charlie, we're just going to talk about this one skill today, or these 2 skills. And here's let's understand, from your perspective, how we got there, what let me do different this time, how do we reinforce it. Now I'm focused your efforts, and I'm not leaving it up to chance in terms of what you focus on or don't focus on, but very kind of like targeted there. The third kind of way to do this is, hey, maybe we just want to help everybody consistently do something. And maybe most people are doing it well, but we want to help them be even better. Now we're saying, all right, quality for this week or for this month is all focused around this. Again, what it enables us to do is get really focused on skill development. It ensures that we can have this consistent cadence of coaching and accountability. And more than anything, it helps us build muscle, right? If you and I were trying to go to the gym, Charlie, and we just did a little bit inconsistently, like we're not going to see any real progress. So a little long-winded on that tip there, but I think the important things to recognize is that, like, don't dilute the impact you can have by focusing on a number in your quality. Focus more on how you can have targeted skill development.
And I think also a lot of the times numbers can encourage sort of negative behaviors from agents as well, which is why I also find that tip very useful. I think potentially one of the worst things I saw in the contact center was a big leaderboard with all the agents' scores kind of from top to bottom. And I remember thinking when I was in there, if you're consistently towards the bottom of that leaderboard, that won't make you feel very good. And of course, there will be a lot of contact centers that use scores without the leaderboards, but even so, agents will talk among themselves. Oh, what did you get for this score? What did you get for that? And there is perhaps a negative behaviors associated with that. So I think by kind of really dialing the focus back onto those kind of key points, as you mentioned, one of those, I think, that's a really invaluable piece of advice.
Yeah, we got to be careful of those unintended consequences of some of those things, like you mentioned, that big reader board as an example. Charlie, tip number 4 for you. What do you have on board for us?
Absolutely. So yeah, I think my next tip is to start early with quality assurance and to really build it into the agent onboarding experience to make sure kind of agents know from the get-go what is expected of them and kind of what their performance standards are. And doing so really does kind of make it clear to agents kind of what the business expects from them. And yeah, I think it's quite a simple tip compared to some of those that we had before. But I think really kind of making sure that QA is part of that kind of opening few weeks, so it's kind of ingrained in the agent's minds, is critical.
Yeah, and to your point, Charlie, if someone's never worked in a contact center before, and even if they have, right, we don't know what kind of their past experience was. The idea of quality assurance can be a pretty new concept for people who might have come from other things, and we want to make sure that it's set up in the right way, that people recognize how it's actually there for their success, not to be this kind of like secret dark room, big brother type of thing. It's all about setting expectations and familiarity and comfort. So early and often, I would echo in terms of the introduction of not just quality assurance, but workforce management and other types of functions that may be new or different for people who've never worked in a contact center before, or even if they have, you want to set the expectation on how it works in your organization.
And again, I think it comes back to your point earlier around kind of unintended consequences. Like, what are the unintended consequences of bringing in performance management sort of late into the kind of agent kind of journey, and whether that's really front of mind as they start kind of engaging with customers too. So in a way, I think this is all kind of related, quite closely related, a lot of our points here.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that, Charlie. As I think about my fourth tip, I want to go to the way that we evaluate skills today. One of the traps that I see organizations fall into when they're evaluating quality is that they use the wrong type of criteria when they're evaluating skills. And what I mean by that is there's really kind of two categories of skills that are demonstrated in the contact center. There's the first set of skills that are really all around if something was done. For example, I think about the one contact center that I worked at. We had a standard greeting all of the time, and it was, thank you for calling. Company name. My name is Justin. May I have your domain name, please? In this case, the number one identifier for us was domain names. That's the business that we were in. So every interaction had to begin with that greeting. Hello, thank you for calling business. My name is, your name. May I have your domain name, please? There's no learning curve required. There's no like varying proficiency. Really, you do the greeting or you don't. You don't have to spend a ton of training. You can even have it printed in front of you and you know how to do it. In that case, we evaluated the greeting using a yes, no, or in some cases it could be not applicable, right? Again, depending on the nature of how that might have been routed into me, because it's was measuring if something was done. But then there's another set of skills that are actually measured how something was done, not if something was done, right? These are skills that have varied, very kind of levels of proficiency. They often take time to master. And in those cases, we should be measuring them with some sort of Likert scale. So, in other words, on a scale from 1 to 5. It's important for us to clearly define how a 1 is different from a 2, from a 3, from a 4, from a 5, but it enables us to more effectively recognize where work was done, where there is some level of proficiency. Even if you're not fully proficient, it's showing that you're making progress, but also enables me to deliver targeted coaching. The trap that I see organizations fall into is they misclassify. Something that actually has varied levels of proficiency and is looking at how something was done was measured in a yes or no. And then you get agents who are frustrated because they're not getting partial credit, or what they feel like is that they're a complete failure because they haven't absolutely mastered this skill yet, when really it's something that takes time and we're missing an opportunity to reinforce what they know and further develop their skills. So this can be a hard lesson to come by, and it's not easy to even do this alone. But take a hard look at your criteria and evaluate: is it looking at if something was done, or is it looking at how something was done?
Yeah, and I think again that's a particularly good point, because oftentimes an analyst will create a scorecard in the contact center and move on. And then over time, you kind of get this legacy criteria that nobody really knows the correct way to the best way to measure it. And I know that's an important part where calibration comes in as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. But yeah, again, I think it's a good point. And it also brings back the importance of knowing how to weight the scorecard properly. And if I go back to one of my earlier points as well about looking for that correlation between quality scores and customer satisfaction, that may also help with some of the weighting. But yeah, again, a really great point, Justin.
Yeah, awesome, Charlie. All right, if my scoreboard is right, we're down to your tip number 5, our tip number 9 for today. We're almost there. Charlie, this is the last one. What do you have for us?
Excellent. Yeah, so my final tip is to engage in outlier analysis. And so I know a lot of contact centers will already assess kind of calls that may be outliers in terms of customer sentiment or transfer rates or things like that. But I think it's also important to analyze kind of calls with long handling times. And I know a lot of analysts often avoid doing this because, they have to hit certain KPIs, and it takes a lot longer to analyze a 30-minute call than it does a 2-minute call. But those calls with a very long handling time are often where the biggest learnings are in terms of broken processes, knowledge gaps, maybe a coaching issue too. So I think very much kind of looking at that AHT metric, as well as those others that I mentioned as well, as transfer rate and sentiment, focusing on the outliers is often where the greatest opportunities lie within a connected learning strategy. Yes, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one too, Justin.
Charlie, I like that. One of the habits I tried to build in all of my quality analysts is curiosity. And we often talked about the curious QA. And one of the attributes of the curious QA is that they look to the outliers. And we would do it for a number of reasons. Sometimes it was to help find new best practices. And part of the catalyst in one contact center for us was we had somebody who like their customers loved them, but from an internal measure standpoint, they were taking the longest. But we also saw is that even though their individual interactions were taking long, they were actually driving down repeat contacts. They were increasing customer spend, right? There are all of these other metrics that were being positively influenced. And we would have never really known that if we hadn't dug into what's causing these interactions to run long. In another example, we recognized that a new system integration was actually causing a lot of problems on a certain contact type. That agents, it was complicated, it was messy for them to navigate. So also enabled us to have some interesting conversations. So Charlie, I think you're spot on. There's lots of value in studying what happens every single day and what's regular and common so that we can get really good in the commonplaces. But I think it's important to study the uncommon to figure out how can we learn and benefit and grow from what happens in those interactions as well.
And as you said there, actually, Justin, as well, you can not only find kind of the issues, but you'll also find positive lessons for positive reinforcement almost. If there's a long call that perhaps suggests that the customer was very stressed or had a kind of a hugely significant problem, and if the agent deals with that and you're listening through and you think, oh, they're actually doing a very good job, maybe there's an opportunity to kind of recognize the agent positively, kind of celebrate how they handled that call too, and maybe again add to your best practice library for if that issue pops up again. And so yeah, it's a great tip, I think.
Yeah, spot on, Charlie. All right, here we are. Tip number 10, final one for episode 1 of the Contact Center Show. Charlie, earlier mentioned mentioned calibration. You also talked about this importance of revisiting these kind of legacy forms. And I think the topic of calibration can be a heated one. In fact, we may spend an entire future show just talking about calibration because of everything that goes on there. But I think I want to highlight 2 things today in terms of a tip for the role of calibration in your contact center. The first is I actually don't think that calibration's best role is to figure out your standard deviation. And if you've been in QA for any time, you probably know that, hey, the old conversation on calibration, it's like we've got to figure out our standard deviation and where our score is at. It's like that is not the best use of our time. The number one best use of our time in calibration is to identify what was the number one or the top 2 things that we identified and would emphasize and coach on out of that interaction. What I'm trying to get at here is in that 3 minutes or that 5 minutes or in that 15-minute conversation that happened with someone, what was the most important thing for us to reinforce or course correct on or underscore and emphasize? Because it can't be everything. If it's everything, then really we walk away from that interaction focusing on nothing. So my first goal for calibration is what was the most important thing that happened in this interaction? And again, it could be positive or it could be something that we need to work on. Let's all agree on that. And what would be the course of action that we would take coming out of this quality evaluation with the agent? That's number one. The second thing, to allude to something that you mentioned earlier, Charlie, is to just reinforce like where there's discrepancies, what's driving that discrepancy? And is it because we don't actually know why we still have this criteria or why it should be evaluated, or we feel like we should be measuring something? It's like, hey, we all feel weird about this thing that happened, but we don't actually have a criteria that addresses it. It's like that type of conversation is a calibration conversation of like, is the form, is the process, is the strategy still doing its job? You can have some really great conversations and you don't have to have them solved in one session, right? It could be multiple sessions, but please use calibration to help get on the same page in terms of what's the most meaningful thing you're trying to drive out of that particular interaction. And also just gut check on the state of your form and is it really doing the job that it needs to. Charlie, I think you and I could go on for hours about tips for quality assurance, but I hope these 10 at least give everybody who tuned in one place to get started. And as I mentioned, here we are, episode 1, season 1 of the Contact Center Show. We've got a ton of topics that we're going to be covering over coming episodes, but here's what I want to say in the meantime. Charlie, first and foremost, thank you to CX today. Thank you to yourself for hopping on with me and sharing some of what you've been learning and some of what it kind of stands out to you as someone who's been in this space now for quite some time. For those of you that have tuned in, look, if you like what you heard, there's a couple things that you can do to help us. Share this with your network, wherever you're listening or watching, subscribe to this, and more importantly, come back for the next one because we'd love to share more with you. We really are doing this to help you feel confident and capable in leading your contact center every single day. I'm Justin Robbins, your host for the Contact Center Show. I've been sitting down with senior editor of CX Today, Charlie Mitchell. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.